Hey everyone, as a lot of you know, over the last couple of years, I've been really focusing on improving my over-the-board chess, playing in as many tournaments as possible in the very sparse Midwest chess scene. And I'm very happy to share that recently I achieved two goals that I've been working towards for a very long time. I tied for first in my section in a classical tournament for the first time, and that also brought my USCF rating up over 1800 for the first time. Over-the-board chess has been a real challenge for me, especially since I learned how to play online. I don't get a chance to play in too many classical tournaments, and something about the over-the-board environment has just been really difficult for me to get used to, the staying focused, the stamina needed to keep going through 5 rounds over a weekend. I do love the longer time controls, and I've actually gotten up to top boards in the last round for a couple of tournaments in the last 6 months or so, but I've never been able to actually pull off that last round win until this most recent tournament. Somehow it all came together and I was able to stay focused, keep the momentum going, and keep my nerves under control to go 4.5 out of 5 in my section. And I shared that first place with a very talented junior from Minnesota. I think he's 10 or 11, just to keep me humble. My games were all quite long. They all went into the end game, and I was honestly often the last game to finish out of the round, so this definitely was not an easy victory. But I'm gonna walk you through some key positions from all my games, show you the themes that kind of were running through the entire tournament, and talk you through my thought process. So this tournament, by the way, I don't think I said it, this is the under 1900 section of the Rochester Open. This was all part of the Rochester Chess Festival that was happening over in Minnesota. The night before the tournament, there was a special event, a simul, that I played in against John Bartholomew and Sean Nagel. That video is also up on my channel if you missed it. It was a really fun time, great way to warm up, and also very fun to meet John, of course. But at the same time as the Rochester Open, the Midwest Women and Girls Tournament was also happening, but I was playing in the under 1900 section of the Open. Okay, so first game was the only one that I drew, but I did have a winning position. So here, I decided I wanted to trade down into an endgame. You will see this is a theme throughout the entire tournament. I decided I wanted to trade down to endgames quite a bit. So here I captured the knight, pawn took back, I captured the queen, rook took back, and now I bring my rook up to c3, attacking both the d pawn and the b pawn, and I'm going to be winning one of them. Bishop drops back to defend. I bring my knight over to d4 to add some more pressure to this pawn. I didn't want to just take the d pawn because that would have allowed white to grab the open file, and I wanted to be a little bit more patient here, build up. I was going to be winning one of these pawns, but I wanted to do it in the best way possible. Rook comes down to defend the e pawn, and now I brought my other rook up to b4 because after I capture on b3 with my knight, I knew that once that knight moved, my rook down here was going to be undefended, and there might have possibly been a way for white to take advantage of that, so I just wanted this pawn to be defending my rook so that the knight could move whenever it wanted. All right, so king comes in, I finally take this pawn, king moves closer, and now this I think is probably, it's not exactly where it turned into the draw. Black is still technically better here, but I could have played this in a better way that didn't give my opponent quite as many chances. I played knight c5, and after rook takes on b4 and pawn takes back, my opponent found the very nice move d4. And this is quite annoying because I didn't actually want to make this rook trade quite yet. I wanted to keep my rook around so that it could come over here and stop this outside passer from moving forward. But my knight's under attack, and even if I move my knight, the rook is still going to be going away, and then it's basically into this endgame position that I didn't want, which was my knight is the only one that can stop this pawn. I didn't want my knight to have to be the hero over there. I just wanted my rook to take care of business. I should have just put it, I think, on d4. I haven't looked too closely at the evaluation yet, but just preventing this pawn from moving forward. I at least keep my one rook on the board. That's basically what I wanted. But we're mutually in time trouble at this point, and my opponent had actually offered a couple of draws, and then eventually when I saw it actually was going to be a draw, she was like, do you want to just play it out? And I was like, I mean, yeah, absolutely, let's play it out. I mean, she completely within her right to make sure that I know how to stop an outside or a rook pawn from becoming a queen. So we played it out to bare kings, but this was the one game where I was like, oh, just a little bit careless. But you will see that in a lot of these games, they are drawn positions that I'm actually able to turn around into wins, and we will go and look at one of those right now. So okay, this is my round 2 game, and I will say that when you draw the first round or even like lose the first round, there's a little bit more pressure to kind of make a comeback in the second round. So this isn't always the best way to think, but I was like, I see that this position could potentially turn into a draw when my opponent pushed f5 here, taking, and then the bishop could take back, and then we have this like symmetrical pawn structure over here. I didn't like that as much. I wanted to give myself just like a few more chances for my opponent to go wrong. So instead of capturing the pawn here, I actually pushed it forward, creating this passer on e5. My opponent had to move the king, and now I'm able to get my knight involved. So giving the check, king moves, moving the knight, pawn moves, moving the knight, king moves, moving this pawn up to kind of slow down any like advancement over on this side of the board. And the evaluation is still drawn at this point. I can't remember in this game if my opponent actually offered me a draw. There were a few draw offers that I declined throughout the course of this. And so that is one lesson I will say, is that you don't have to accept draw offers even in the endgame. You can squeeze water out of rock, like you can turn things around. And another thing I will say, the reason that I was so fine with going into these endgame positions is because I've been doing a particular study of endgames recently. And what I've been doing is I have these Sicilian books. I've been like studying the Sicilian for probably over a year now. But I've been going back through a bunch of Sicilian games, looking for ones in these books that like go over 50 moves so that I know that they're actually endgames, and playing those out, kind of studying how the masters are like converting these endgames, just getting more ideas for candidate moves, because a lot of times in the endgame you're just not seeing the ideas or the themes of like what you need to do in order to like try to convert the endgame. So I've been thinking a lot about endgames, and just like seeing this amount of pieces on the board used to be really scary to me because I just felt like I was really bad at endgames, and I feel just a little bit more confident. And so much of these kind of endgames is just like slowly improving your position. So okay, bishop moves, knight moves, and now I give this check again on f4. And just watch this lovely dance of my knight, okay? Knight d5, king moves, defending the b pawn, right? And then knight f6, attacking the h-pawn, and there's just no way that black's going to be able to save those pawns on that side of the board. So knight g7, or sorry, knight g8, and I'm attacking the h-pawn. I'm also threatening knight e7 check, which would win the g-pawn. So just kind of like slowly putting my knight in places that's like forcing my opponent to move his king to places that he doesn't want to move his king. And this is how I start winning the pawns. So I decided to give the check and win the g-pawn. I'd rather like break up the pawn structure on that side of the board. King moves down, stopping my e-pawn from moving forward. I give another check on f4. That knight's just really putting in some work, right? King f7, g3, just holding all my pawns together, getting them off the light squares because my opponent has a light scored bishop. Bishop a2, just kind of shuffling at this point. Knight d5, attacking the b pawn, b5, and now knight c7. I'm winning the a pawn, and after just a couple more moves, my opponent resigned in this position because there's no way for the bishop to get back to save the b pawn, and I'm just going to be pushing my pawns on this side of the board and winning the game. This was a case of the activity of my king. My king was just further up the board. I just kind of planted him on that square and didn't move him at all. Like there's just no way for my opponent to get his king in. He always has to stick around and stop this passed pawn from moving forward. And that, combined with the threats that the knight was making, was just a little bit too much to hold on to. And that advantage just kind of slowly grew. Sometimes endgames just feel so lucky. And this was another one where it was just kind of like the slow conversion of moving the knight where it needed to go. And I felt really good about this win because this is like exactly the kind of endgame I've been studying recently, where you're just able to use your minor pieces. You're able to use the positioning of your king. You're able to use the threats of the passed pawn going forward. And it all just kind of came together into this really nice endgame. So I'm very proud of this one. So okay, we're into game 3. This is the last round on Saturday. And this one, I remember for sure my opponent offered me a draw and I said, nope, I'm going to try and convert this this opposite or the same colored bishop endgame. I didn't say all that. I just made my move. But I tried to get my king quite active because I had this queenside majority, just to kind of back up and show you how we got here. We traded queens here. I gave this check, forced the trade of queens, and then tried to activate my my own king. And then I've got this queenside majority, right? I've got the 3-on-2 over here. And a lot of times this can be enough to win because you're able to trade off pawns over here. You create a passed pawn. Your opponent has to take valuable time over on the far other side of the board dealing with that outside passer that you can kind of use as a decoy. And in the meantime, your king and or your other piece can run over and win all of the kingside pawns. So I kind of had that in mind, just like that general idea. So I traded off all of these pawns, created this outside passer, like easy peasy, right? But I did have to be careful and keep my king kind of around this center because he was also threatening to push forward here and create an outside, or not an outside, a passed pawn of his own down the center of the board. So I couldn't really let my king get too far away from that. But I used my bishop to prevent him from getting too close, and started pushing my passer. And a few moves later, my king actually looks in a pretty passive position at this point. But again, I've still got this massive resource on the side of the board. He plays f5, and this was kind of my shot, right? This position is drawn. This position is winning for black, but you have to find the right moves. I took the pawn on e5, king takes back, and that gave me just the one tempo that I needed to bring my bishop to c4. And the important part of this is it is protecting the a2 square where my pawn is going to be in just a few moves. So we actually talked after the game and we thought that he probably should have played bishop a2 at some point, just to prevent this move entirely. But okay, I got my bishop really active and now I'm basically just forcing the bishop off the board. I have an extra piece, but listen, you gotta be careful because you can't checkmate with just a bishop. So I push my pawn to h5, making sure that it's on a light square so that my bishop can actually get back and defend it. We traded off these pawns, went king f7, gave the check with the bishop, and brought my bishop back just in time to defend my h-pawn. And on the next move, my opponent's gonna have to move his king. I'm gonna win the f-pawn, and I'm going to go on to win the h-pawn as well, march that up the board, and win the game, so he resigned. I was kind of just feeling like I was on the lucky side of this one, as far as like it for sure probably was just a draw. And speaking of luck, this game was also feeling very lucky for me because I got my one chance. My opponent gave me one move to turn the entire game around after it was about to be a draw by repetition. So king safety is paramount when there are still queens on the board, and you will see why in just a moment. So I had been like, I brought all of my pieces over to the A file a couple moves earlier. I was like making all these threats, just like trying to get checks basically. And my opponent was able to start getting checks of his own. And this move attacks both my d-pawn and my rook, and I can't save them both. So I decided to obviously save my rook, even though this move would come with check. And here's where we get into all of the checks, the dancing of the king, right? Bishop blocks, check again, I move up, check again, and I think he basically could have just like gone back and forth here and it would have just been a draw. I don't really have anything better at that point. Even if I block with the bishop here, like he gets checks over here and there's just like, there's literally no way to stop it. So I go back, he brings the knight in, I only have one option. He moves the knight again. Like look at this dance. Look at this dance we're doing with the knight and the king. And now I think my opponent could have just brought the knight back to f3 and continually checked me again, but instead, he captured this pawn on f4, and I didn't really think before playing my next move. I just gave the check on g8. My opponent went to the side of the board. Interestingly, if he'd gone this way, the evaluation is still a draw. That seems very counterintuitive to me, so I expected him to go this way, but what I think we both didn't realize is that this bishop cutting off this h4 square is actually extremely crucial for the attack that's about to come. I give the check on f8, king moves down, and remember this rook is cutting off this entire file, so like he's kind of just like stuck going back and forth between these two squares. Give the check on e8, king goes back up, and now I win this very crucial e6 pawn, and after king goes down, I give another check on the light squares, forcing the king back onto the dark squares, where my bishop is then able to come up and pin the queen to the king, defended of course by my queen, which is now covering this entire e-file. And after just one more check, I move out of the way of any more checks, and my opponent resigned. I texted a friend of mine that I snatched this one from the jaws of a draw. So this was definitely a case of the luck for sure once again. But I've had games like this before too, where it's like you think you might have something more and you play just like one careless move forgetting that your opponent might have some threats as well. And the king safety just kind of decided this one. Once again, you'll notice this is an endgame. I think we were the last game in the entire playing hall for this one. And so now I'm going into the final round on 3.5 out of 4. And the tournament situation at this point going into the final round was the top board was a player who had won all of his games. He was on 4 out of 4, playing against the kid who had won 3.5 out of 4. I also had 3.5 out of 4, and I was playing somebody who had 3 points. So you can kind of do the math. Like, I normally try to like not think about these kind of things in the tournament, but I mean, you're sitting there for 3 hours, your mind kind of wanders. So, okay, final round. I'm trying my best to just stay focused, put everything I have into this last game because like everything is on the line, not make any crazy mistakes, not like go for something just because I feel like I need to win, just playing my best chess, playing what the position is asking for and finding the best moves that I can. The important part is just like staying locked in the entire time, which is really hard when you're in these kind of situations in the last round of a tournament, but I have the black pieces. My opponent starts with d4, d5. We get this Catalan position, which I just love to play the Catalan. I don't know why so many people have been playing the Catalan against me. It's super annoying. And listen, I know that there's theory here. I know that I'm supposed to take this pawn, but I did not study openings for this tournament. I was very minimal in my opening study, so I decided to just go for the structure that I was like relatively familiar with. It's not necessarily the best way to play this opening. It's not the most dynamic way to play this opening, and it can often get kind of suffocating if your opponent really knows what they're doing, but ultimately it's fine. I get a decent position out of the opening. We both castle, continuing development. I bring my rook onto the e-file. My ultimate goal is to push e5. Freeing up my light squared bishop so I can come over here, kind of create this battery and trade off the light squared bishop. My opponent plays e4, I take, knight takes, queen takes, and I've actually had this position or a very similar one in a couple of tournament games, and this move e5 often will like throw people for a loop. They're often reluctant to take this just because the queen is lined up with the rook, and there definitely can be tactics on that file. Just like making all these trades is not necessarily something they want to do, even though that's the best way to play it. I've had games online where they go back to d3 and then I just push this pawn forward. That's not good. And if they go d5, then you can play knight f6, attacking the queen. And then now that this pawn is on d5, there's no way actually for the queen to stick around and defend that d-file. So like the best move for them is just to go queen c2, and then we're just going to be like winning this pawn because there's suddenly no longer defense on that square. So yeah, this e5 move is like really nice, and my opponent took a long time in this position. It was like almost 20 minutes of a think in this position already. So honestly, I was feeling pretty good. I was like, okay, I know what I'm doing. He clearly is a little bit hesitant about what he wants to do. He ended up taking the pawn. I took with the knight. I'm like totally fine to make all of these trades on this e5 square. And now bishop f4. And I kind of expected this move. And initially in my earlier calculation, I was like, oh, I can just take on f3 with check and then, you know, basically make all these trades. Like queen would be forced to take, so it's not being attacked by the rook anymore. Make this trade here. And then like I was fine with that position. But then I saw an even better move, which is just knight g6. The queen is being attacked by the rook, but there's really not a good spot for that queen to move. And I've got two attackers on this square. So if the queen, you know, wants to stick around and continue to defend the f4 square, like the only really way to do that is to go queen d4. I can take here and trade, sure, whatever. Either way, if, say, this pawn takes back, I can take the queen, knight takes, and then I win this pawn. So I'm winning a pawn in that scenario. And same thing if the queen moves anywhere else, like if it goes back to c2, which is generally a good square for the queen, I'm just winning this pawn outright. And like I really like this position. My open files are really nice. I'm able to sort of slowly bring my queen in and potentially attack the king because it's just lost one of its defensive pawns on that side of the board. So I'm feeling great about this position. So instead, my opponent went for something more dynamic, which is actually the top engine move. I briefly considered it, but I didn't really think it was a serious option. But my opponent sacked his queen. And I was like, oh, okay. Takes the rook, I take back, and he gets a rook and a bishop for the queen. And so again, this is one of the most dynamic positions I've had in a game, in a classical game, in a very, very long time. A lot of times my games go more into like, we make equal trades until the end game and then I have to squeeze it out, as you've seen in the previous games that I've showed you. But look, I like my queen. I love having a queen on the board. I would rather have a queen on the board than not have a queen on the board. So at this point, I was like, I'm going to win the game. I'm going to win the game because I have an extra queen. But that is not the way that you need to be thinking when you're in the last round of a tournament in a must-win situation. You have to kind of calm yourself down, which I was eventually able to do, and realize that your opponent is still having some threats here. They still have rooks. they still have an extra minor piece, which is not nothing. And a few moves later, he was able to lock down this bishop onto d6, which was actually quite annoying. So I played h6, just preventing the knight from coming forward here. I didn't want to give this bishop away for the knight necessarily. Played h4, rook e8. I would probably like to trade off a pair of rooks. I wasn't necessarily wanting to trade off everything because I wasn't entirely sure that I could win the queen versus just a bishop and a rook. He played h5, forcing my knight back. Rook d1, kind of making my queen move out of the way because I didn't want that discovered attack. Like I just didn't want to deal with the calculations of it all. And now knight e5, really activating the remaining minor pieces. I decided I wanted to trade off the knight because knights are tricky and I'd just rather not deal with it, right? Now f3, I decided to kind of reroute my bishop over here so that if this f pawn ever moved forward, I could just trade this off. The fact that this diagonal was a light square diagonal, I didn't necessarily want to let his light squared bishop live for much longer because then there's like back rank threats and things like that. So that was kind of my idea here. I also wanted to play queen c5 and like attack this pawn, potentially like give this check, attack this pawn. So these are kind of all the ideas that were swimming through my head at this point. He played king f2, b6, trying to trade these things off, get rid of this pawn that was like very nicely defending the dark squared bishop, which he actually was very agreeable to. So okay, sure, fair enough. So we moved his bishop back. I finally traded the rooks, giving him this open file, but thinking that I needed to get my queen out of here and I couldn't move it until this rook was somewhere safe or just completely gone because my queen was the only piece defending my rook. So now finally I'm able to play queen f5, g4, I drop back to the dark squares, I'm looking at this, I'm looking at this, I'm looking at this. He defends that b pawn with the rook, and now instead of here, which is what the engine wants, I decided to play with my queen in the center, so I gave the check on d4. King moves up, which it seems kind of counterintuitive, but this was actually like the safest square for the king to go, it seemed. So I attack the rook, king comes back to defend it. I'm not gonna come back here, obviously, because he can just repeat moves, and I kind of got the feeling that he was for sure willing to repeat moves a couple times in this game. I moved my king off the back rank, my opponent improved his bishop, just kind of shuffling pieces at this point, trying to block off my opponent's potential infiltration points by like moving this bishop back, for example, giving another check, king moves up again, another check. And at this point, I was spending enough time on each of my moves that we were maybe at this point, it might have been a little bit later, but at some point we got down to, we were equal on time, or like I was even worse on time, if I remember correctly. So just making moves, getting that 30-second increment, giving myself more time to think. I know that I still have checks in this position. I know that there's probably not a chance I'm going to lose this position unless I'm extremely careless. So just kind of slowly poking at the position and hoping that my opponent will make some kind of an inaccuracy that allows me to like win a pawn or make a breakthrough and attack the king. The king's safety, his king was actually like fairly safe right now. So I needed to get it to a point where it wasn't so safe, and it actually took me quite a few moves to get there. So king goes back, I start pushing these queenside pawns, the bishop is rerouting. I was thinking he was gonna go rook here, and then that would defend the bishop, giving me a check like this. I pushed c4, just like preventing this move from ever being a thing, but then he just dropped back and like, I can't stop this from happening, so this was also very annoying. And again, I'm always looking at these kind of back rank threats, like if he can get his rook onto an open file, and then like this check, and if my king is on the back rank, then I don't have an escape square, right? So I have to be very careful. So now, okay, giving checks, kind of trying to force his king out into the middle of nowhere, protecting my pawn, rook comes up, I give another check, trying to win this bishop. Obviously, he's not going to allow me to win the bishop, whatever, that's fine. I go queen g3, trying to potentially go after this pawn and just kind of deal with this pawn chain. That was my main thing. These pawns are all on light squares. The only other piece other than my queen I have left is the light squared bishop. So like if I can get extra attackers on one of these pawns, we could potentially make a breakthrough. So okay, now bishop check, king has to go back to g8. Bishop e4, protecting that pawn. And again, a lot of these moves seem really slow, but we are at move 44 right now. So you can imagine we're down pretty far on time. There's not additional time added. You get your 30-second increment on every move and that's it. So we just kind of had to continue playing these good enough moves. This is something I talk about in blitz games where it's like, you kind of just have to find a move that doesn't lose. So I basically just had to be thinking about ways to complicate the position, make threats that my opponent couldn't ignore, slowly improve the position, improve the placement of my pieces. But I will say, if you look at the engine here, this is very close to being drawn. My opponent has essentially created a fortress, like holding down all of these pawns with his bishop. The rook is also helping to defend everything and like stave off my queen from actually like making anything happen with all of these queen checks. And now you'll start to see some shuffling too. Like, okay, just moving my queen back. Bishop goes back 2, give me more checks, and then, okay, I'm like trying to win this pawn. King comes up like just in time to defend, rerouting the rook, trying to get it onto this open file. I made a waiting move with my bishop, thinking that if he goes here right away, well, then I'm going to end up winning the rook, so we can't do that. Bishop f4. I bring my bishop back because I'm like, okay, we're not really doing anything over here. He clearly is not going to fall for this trick. We repeat, but I don't actually want to repeat, so I moved my bishop back here, and I'm like, okay, for a while I've been thinking basically the only way I'm going to break through is by pushing f5. This is not really something I want to do at this point because I'm not actually sure if this rook gets into this open file that I can defend against all of the checks that are going to be happening. And this, again, this bishop is like looking at this g7 square, so if this rook like gets on to the 7th rank and then like we're losing pawns over here, it's a little tricky. So I was really reluctant to actually play this move, but there was a point after the rook came over and was threatening to checkmate me because, again, this bishop is covering the h7 square. There was a point where I just had to. I had to play f5. I had to block the path of this bishop, and after the check, I move my king up. He can't check me again right away because the bishop covers. And even if like this trade happens, like just getting rid of some of these pawns will open up more lines and files for my queen to come in and give those checks. So this needed to happen. This was my entire plan, but my opponent went to a8. And here's the thing. Sometimes you have to change your plan. He was going to play here, right? This was his whole idea. He just wants to check. He wants to give these sideways checks and, you know, potentially come over here and win this. And I realized that if I take this pawn now, this opens up the diagonal for his bishop to come in and give even more checks. When you're in a position where the next check really matters, you want to be able to calculate a line where you can get your king to a place where it cannot be checked anymore. And as we saw in that round 4 game, the moment that your opponent stops checking you and you have a check, that can often be the difference maker. And so this was very scary for me, by the way. I was like not sure if this was actually going to work. I left this pawn hanging. I went bishop d5, and this attacks the rook, but it also attacks this pawn. And I figured if I could get this pawn, I could probably win the game. And so my opponent gave the check. I moved my king onto a square where he could not check me anymore because remember, he can't go back here because the bishop defends. And because I hadn't taken this pawn, I don't get checked on the light squares. So this was very crucial for me in this position. He took this pawn, but then I take on f3 with my bishop. And after the king goes back, I give the check on e3. And the game's over. I'm winning the rook, but more importantly, I'm going to be checkmating after he goes here. This is how you finish it out. But he resigned back in this position because he obviously saw that was going to be the end of the game. And I won. I won the last round of the tournament. Like I finally was able to hold it together. Kept my focus the entire time. This was such a mental victory for me that I can't even describe it. It's so gratifying to see that all of the work I've been putting in is like worth it. So if you take anything away from this other than me just like bragging about my wins, it is possible to pull everything together that you've been learning and use it in your games. The main thing is so mental. Like over the board chess is so much about your psychology. It's about confidence. It's about patience. It's about like staying focused in the games. And if you can do that, those are the players who are able to do well in the over the board tournaments and like decline those draw offers, like fight on until the very end, because even if whether you win the game, lose the game, draw the game, like it just the experience of being able to play out those games will give you the confidence in your future games, or they will teach you a lesson that you can learn to go forward and like continually improve your chess, which is genuinely what this is all about. Results are fantastic when they come, and all of the close calls I've had over the last couple of years has made this one feel like so much sweeter. But the main thing is like I'm just continually trying to improve my chess because I love the game of chess. Like I want to keep learning and I want to keep improving, and that is the main thing that I came away from this weekend with is I just love this game and I want to keep playing it. So I hope you do too. So if you stuck around this long, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate your support. Thank you also to the organizers of the Rochester Chess Festival. This is like such a fantastic event. I've been coming here since 2023 and it's always run so well, and they've expanded it so much. Back when I went the first time in 2023, this was the first time I'd ever traveled out of my home state of North Dakota to play in a chess tournament. So like a pretty memorable experience for me. I played in the same section 3 years ago. I got 1.5 out of 5. The following year in 2024, I got 3 out of 5, and I didn't go last year. This year came back and was able to, hit the home run and get 4.5 out of 5. But that is a wrap on the Rochester Chess Festival. Again, thank you guys so much for all the support. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon.